The brief notice in 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 11, appears as a simple report that an old prophet in Bethel hears from his sons about the actions of another prophet. Yet across centuries of interpretation, this verse has been anything but minor. Jewish commentators questioned why a prophet resides comfortably in Bethel, a site already marked by contested worship. Christian interpreters saw here the emergence of a troubling intermediary, someone who bears the title prophet, yet stands in ambiguous relation to truth. Modern scholarship, reading the narrative as part of a larger theological history, recognizes this moment as a turning point. The story shifts from a clear confrontation between a man of God and royal power into a more complex conflict within the prophetic sphere itself. What kind of figure is introduced here, and why is he left unnamed? Why does the narrative emphasize his age and settled presence, only to have him immediately drawn into events he did not initiate? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when truth, already spoken, already witnessed, enters the domain of someone responsible for interpreting it? The verse constructs a scene of transmission. A prophetic act has taken place publicly in opposition to the king. That act has been seen, remembered, and is now reported. Nothing is hidden. The content arrives as a complete account, including both what was done and what was said. In this respect, the narrative aligns with a recurring concern in earlier interpretation. The problem is not the absence of truth, but what becomes of truth once it passes through human hands. The sons function as reliable witnesses, a detail noted by medieval commentators, who insisted that the report is full and accurate. The question, then, is not whether the old prophet knows enough, but how he will respond to what he knows. At the same time, the setting complicates the situation. Bethel is not a neutral location. It is a place where religious meaning is already under strain, where competing claims about proper worship coexist uneasily. To dwell there, as many interpreters have observed, is itself suggestive. Does age here signify wisdom, or has long residence produced a kind of quiet accommodation? The narrative does not answer directly, but it invites the reader to hold these possibilities together. This tension between established authority and incoming revelation, between complete testimony and uncertain reception, has often been treated narratively in traditional exegesis. The approach that follows seeks to make that explicit. By tracing the original Hebrew of the verse through a series of interrelated triads, it becomes possible to observe how its elements organize themselves, how a prophetic figure is introduced without name, how settled presence is placed under pressure, how testimony accumulates and is directed, and how the entire movement converges on a single point of vulnerability, the human mediator. Seen in this light, 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 11 is not merely a transition between episodes, it is a carefully constructed moment in which revelation, transmission, and interpretation are brought into alignment only to raise a pressing question. When truth is fully present, what determines whether it remains intact or becomes something else? The first triad of terms, vi, and, navi, prophet, and echad, one, or a certain, follows a logic of causation. The conjunction initiates a new narrative movement. The role prophet defines the function of divine mediation, and one instantiates that role in an unspecified individual. The terms operate together to produce a figure whose identity is intentionally minimal, shifting attention away from biography and toward function. The result is the emergence of a prophetic presence that must be evaluated by what it does, rather than who it is. What becomes apparent is that truth may enter without familiar markers, requiring attentiveness rather than recognition. This triad invites a practical question. Can one recognize truth when it arrives without familiar labels? In lived faith, not every genuine insight comes through expected channels or trusted figures. Sometimes, clarity emerges from an unexpected source, or in a form that lacks the markers one is accustomed to trusting. This triad encourages attentiveness that is grounded not in recognition of status, but in evaluation of substance. It asks whether one's discernment depends too heavily on who speaks, rather than on what is being said. The second triad consists of zaken, old or elder, yoshev, dwelling or sitting, and bibayit, inner house. Here we see a non-linear logic. Age suggests wisdom and authority, dwelling suggests stability, yet the location implied by inner house, within Bethel, introduces tension. The elements do not reinforce one another cleanly. Instead, they complicate expectations. What appears as groundedness may, in context, indicate accommodation. The terms together generate a portrait of established presence that is no longer clearly aligned with its original purpose. Over time, stability can quietly drift into entrenchment. The relationship here presses on the subtle risk of spiritual stagnation. Stability, routine, and long-held positions often feel like signs of maturity, yet they can gradually harden into resistance. One may remain in place outwardly, while drifting inwardly. The image of the old prophet suggests the need for ongoing self-examination. Has settledness remained aligned with truth, or has it become a quiet form of disengagement? The lesson is not to reject stability, but to keep it responsive rather than inert. The third triad, El, Bethel, Vayavo, and he came, and Banav, his sons, follows a logic of reinforcement. The setting frames the movement brings the sons, and the sons amplify the significance of the setting by carrying its events into the father's awareness. The plural sons intensifies the epistemic weight. This is not a single report, but converging testimony. The triad produces the sense of mediated knowledge entering a closed system with cumulative force. Truth here arrives not as an isolated voice, but as corroborated witness pressing inward. In practice, understanding often comes through others, through conversation, observation, and shared experience. The presence of multiple witnesses suggests that confirmation matters. When several independent voices converge on the same reality, it carries a different weight than isolated impressions. This triad encourages openness to communal insight, while also recognizing that such insight will eventually confront one's own internal framework. The fourth triad, Vayesaper, and he recounted, lo, to him, and et, the object marker, follows a logic of conjunction. The act of recounting presupposes both speaker and recipient, while the object marker binds them to a definite, shared content. The terms form a complete communicative unit in which transmission, reception, and substance are inseparable. The recounting is structured and intentional, establishing clarity before any reinterpretation occurs. When something is communicated this fully, what follows depends less on what was said and more on how it is handled. Here, our attention turns to communication itself. When something is conveyed clearly and directly, responsibility shifts to the listener. Misunderstanding is no longer the primary concern. Interpretation becomes decisive. In daily life, moments arise when the situation is sufficiently clear, when the facts are known, the implications evident. At that point, the question becomes not what was said, but how will I respond to what I have heard? This triad underscores accountability in reception. The fifth triad, Kol, all, Hamaase, the deed or the act, and Asher, which, follows a logic of convergence. Totality and specificity come together. and the relative particle ensures that the content is fully defined rather than abstract. The terms collectively produce a bounded and exhaustive account. Nothing is omitted and nothing is left vague. The resulting clarity removes uncertainty about the event itself, shifting attention to the response it will provoke. There are times when partial knowledge obscures judgment, but there are also times when enough is known to act. The insistence on all challenges the tendency to delay response under the pretext of needing more information. It invites the reader to consider whether hesitation sometimes masks reluctance rather than uncertainty. When the essential elements are present, the responsibility to respond cannot be indefinitely deferred. The sixth triad, Asa, he did, Ish, man, and Ha Elohim, of God, follows a logic of mutual reinforcement. Action, agent, and divine affiliation define one another in a balanced relationship. The deed identifies the man is distinguished by his association with God, and that association gives the action its authority. The triad generates not just an event, but an event carrying recognized divine commission. This establishes a hierarchy in which such action cannot be easily countered by secondary claims. Actions tied to genuine conviction or truth carry a different weight than those based on preference or convenience. In practice, this raises the question of how one distinguishes between what is merely persuasive and what is truly grounded. It also asks whether one gives proper weight to what has clear moral or spiritual authority, or whether competing voices are allowed to blur that clarity. Recognition of true authority requires both discernment and willingness to submit to it. The seventh triad, Hayom, today, Be Beit, in a house, and El, Bethel, follows a logic of coexistence. Time, place, and sacred designation operate simultaneously, each giving context to the others. Today introduces immediacy, in a house situates the event spatially, and Bethel overlays theological tension onto that space. Together, they produce a moment that is fully situated, present, local, and charged with religious significance. Insight does not emerge in abstraction but within particular environments that shape its reception. This teaches us to situate insight within context. Understanding does not occur in abstraction. It emerges within particular environments, cultural, relational, and spiritual. The same truth can be received differently depending on where one stands. This triad encourages awareness of one's own setting. How do surroundings shape perception? Are there influences that make certain truths easier to ignore or reinterpret? It calls for attentiveness to the environment in which one is attempting to understand and respond. The eighth triad, Ve'et, and with object marker, Ha-Devarim, the words or the matters, and Asher, which follows a logic of inclusion. The conjunction extends the report, the words broaden its scope, and the relative particle integrates them into the same defined structure as the deeds. The triad ensures that both action and speech are preserved together as a unified disclosure. Words do not merely accompany events, they interpret and stabilize their meaning. Events alone do not always carry clear meaning. They require articulation. Words help fix significance, preventing events from being reshaped after the fact. In personal practice, this suggests the importance of naming and reflecting on what has occurred rather than leaving it vague. When experiences are not clearly interpreted, they remain open to distortion. Clarity in articulation safeguards clarity in memory. The ninth triad is built from Diber. He spoke, El, Tu, and Hamelech, the king. This follows a logic of causation. Speech is directed, direction reaches authority, and authority becomes the target of that speech. The terms align to produce a movement from utterance to confrontation. What is said is not contained within private space, but presses outward toward power. Speech here functions as an instrument that brings truth into direct engagement with authority. Truth that remains private does not fully confront reality. There are moments when what is understood must be brought into relation with authority, whether that authority is institutional, relational, or internal. Speaking toward power, in whatever form it takes, requires resolve. This triad asks whether one is willing not only to perceive truth, but to allow it to challenge what holds influence. We can now combine our existing analyses. The first three triads together follow a logic of reinforcement at a higher level. The introduced prophetic figure, his settled and possibly compromised condition, and the arrival of his sons interact so that each intensifies the others. The more fixed the prophet's state, the more forceful the incoming testimony becomes. The plural sons deepen this effect, presenting not a single interruption, but a converging incursion of witnessed truth. What emerges is the pressure of active revelation entering a static and potentially misaligned interpretive center. This draws attention to the encounter between established perspective and incoming insight. In lived experience, deeply held frameworks are rarely overturned by a single impression. They are challenged by persistent, converging signals. The question becomes whether one allows such pressure to prompt re-evaluation, or whether one resists it to preserve existing assumptions. Growth often begins where interruption is allowed to be taken seriously. The next three triads follow a logic of convergence. The act of recounting, the completeness of the deed, and the authority of the man of God align into a single, coherent testimony. Each component strengthens the others, producing a report that is internally unified and externally authoritative. The clarity achieved here leaves little room for ambiguity. The structure suggests that when truth is fully presented, the decisive factor shifts to the integrity of its reception. The scripture here emphasizes that clarity does not guarantee acceptance. Even when information is complete, coherent, and authoritative, it still passes through the filter of personal disposition. This triad invites examination of that filter. Are there predispositions, loyalties, or fears that shape how truth is received? It suggests that integrity in reception is as crucial as accuracy in transmission. The final three triads exemplify a logic of causation. The immediacy of today in Bethel leads into the inclusion of words, and those words move directly toward the king. The progression runs from context to articulation to confrontation. The terms together situate revelation within a contested environment where religious meaning and political authority intersect. What begins as a localized occurrence extends into a challenge directed at power. Insight that remains confined to context has limited effect. It becomes significant when it engages with structures of influence. In practice, this means considering how what one learns or perceives bears on larger systems, relationships, responsibilities, and decisions. The triad encourages movement beyond observation toward meaningful engagement. Now, when we combine the verse up to this point, we see an emergent harmony of receiver, content, and impact. Each element completes the others. The receiver provides the setting for the content gives substance to the impact, and the impact reveals the significance of both. This harmony reflects a perfect structure with a single failure point. The receiver, the old prophet, is interpretively vulnerable, and that vulnerability becomes the critical point in the system. The structure shows how revelation emerged as an integrated whole that depends on the fidelity of its human participant. This integration brings the elements together into a single dynamic. One receives, one interprets, and one acts. Each stage depends on the others. A failure at any point distorts the whole. This invites a holistic self-assessment. Is one attentive in receiving, careful in interpreting, and faithful in acting? The balance among these determines whether understanding leads to alignment or fragmentation. We now can complete our understanding of the verse by combining the revelatory process previously demonstrated with the final two terms, va yes aperum, and they recounted them, and la avihem, to their father. This introduces a logic of reinforcement that becomes cyclical. The revealed content is consolidated through collective recounting, and that consolidated form is directed back toward an originating or authoritative figure. The plural recounting intensifies the sense of shared witness, yet the return to the Father introduces a point where interpretation can reshape what is received. The cycle does not secure truth automatically. It amplifies whatever resides at its center, making the integrity of that center decisive. What emerges, then, is not simply a sequence of actions, but a fully formed structure in which nothing essential is lacking. The deed has been performed, the word has been spoken, the witnesses have observed, and the report has been carefully conveyed. Revelation has moved outward into public space and returned inward through reliable testimony. There is no gap in knowledge, no obscurity in what has occurred. This completeness sharpens rather than resolves the tension. The movement of the verse may be understood as a progression from witnessed event to narrated totality to interpretive reception. By the time the old prophet enters the scene, the first two stages have already reached their conclusion. What remains is not the task of uncovering truth, but the responsibility of responding to it. In this light, the old prophet stands not at the beginning of inquiry, but at the point where inquiry has already yielded clarity. The narrative has ensured that what reaches him is both comprehensive and coherent, action and speech aligned, testimony corroborated, context fully specified. The patterns traced through the verse converge toward this condition. Nothing essential is left uncertain. Yet this very clarity introduces a new kind of instability. The verse suggests that truth, even when fully present, does not preserve itself. Once it enters the domain of interpretation, it becomes subject to the disposition and condition of the one who receives it. The details that define the old prophet, his age, his settled dwelling, his location within Bethel, take on renewed significance here. They are not merely descriptive. They indicate an interpretive environment shaped over time, one that will influence how what is known is handled. The structural insight that follows is precise. Revelation does not fail in its transmission. It is tested in its reception. The cycle of revelation, recounting, and return does not guarantee stability. It consolidates and amplifies what is given, but the outcome depends on the integrity of the interpretive center through which it passes. Where that center is aligned, clarity is preserved. Where it is not, the same completeness becomes the material from which distortion can emerge. Seen in this way, the verse marks a decisive transition. The narrative moves from the external confrontation between prophetic word and royal authority to an internal tension within the prophetic sphere itself. The problem is no longer simply whether truth will be opposed, but whether it will remain intact as it is received, processed, and acted upon. By presenting revelation in its most complete form, the text isolates the remaining variable. The question is no longer what has been revealed, but what will be done with what has already been made clear.